Imagine a royal family so obsessed with power that they didn't just keep it in the family, they married the family. Cleopatra's dynasty, the Ptolemies, turned royal bloodlines into a twisted experiment of incest, jealousy, and murder. Brothers married sisters, mothers plotted against daughters, and husbands poisoned wives, all in the name of keeping Egypt's throne pure. But purity came with a price: madness, betrayal, and death. When Cleopatra was born, she inherited not only a kingdom of gold and glory, but also generations of dysfunction and deceit. Her story isn't just about beauty or love. It's about survival in a family that devoured its own. In today's episode of Nutty Time Tales, we're peeling back the royal veil on one of history's most bizarre dynasties, the incestuous house that produced the legendary Cleopatra. We'll uncover the secrets of Egypt's royal marriages, explore how twisted family politics shaped Cleopatra's rise, and reveal how centuries of inbreeding forged one of the world's most infamous queens. So, grab your laurel crowns and brace yourself. This isn't your average royal scandal. This is the story of the family that married itself. To understand how Cleopatra's family became one of the most twisted dynasties in history, we have to travel back nearly 300 years before her birth, to a time when Egypt wasn't even ruled by Egyptians. After Alexander the Great died in 323 BCE, his empire was torn apart by his generals, each snatching a piece of the fallen giant. One of them, Ptolemy XIII, claimed Egypt. He was not Egyptian at all, but a Macedonian Greek warrior who had fought beside Alexander. And from that moment, the Greek Ptolemies began ruling Egypt, a foreign dynasty that tried to blend Greek ideals with ancient Egyptian godhood. But power corrupts, and divine power corrupts absolutely. The Ptolemies saw themselves as living gods, descendants of Zeus and the sun god Ra. To maintain their divine bloodline, they turned to an old Egyptian royal tradition, keeping the blood pure through family marriage. Brother married sister, uncle married niece. Generation after generation, this divine union became the Ptolemaic norm. It wasn't about love, it was about control. Egypt's throne was the prize, and anyone outside the family was considered a threat. This wasn't a one-time experiment. It was a royal system of genetic monopoly. Over the next 3 centuries, Ptolemies would marry each other in an unbroken chain of incestuous unions, until it became nearly impossible to tell where one bloodline ended and another began. And with each new generation came more paranoia, more backstabbing, and more murder. By the time Cleopatra was born, her ancestors had perfected a form of family politics that blurred the line between romance and revenge. But here's the irony. This bizarre system worked. The Ptolemies ruled Egypt longer than any other foreign dynasty, blending Greek intellect, Egyptian religion, and ruthless family loyalty. Still, beneath the marble palaces and golden crowns lay something rotten, an empire built on secrets, betrayals, and bloodlines that were far too close for comfort. Cleopatra would be the last and most famous heir of this strange genetic experiment. But before her came centuries of madness. Imagine a grand temple in Alexandria filled with flickering torches and the scent of incense. Priests chant in Greek and Egyptian. Gold gleams from the walls. The crowd cheers as a royal wedding begins. But the bride and groom? They're brother and sister. That was the Ptolemaic definition of a family gathering. While most civilizations treated incest as taboo, the Ptolemies saw it as sacred. They modeled themselves after Egyptian gods like Osiris and Isis, divine siblings who ruled together as husband and wife. If the gods could do it, so could the royals. Or so they claimed. The first of these divine unions began with Ptolemy II Philadelphus, who married his full sister Arsinoe II around 275 BCE. Even the name Philadelphus means sibling loving. Their marriage was celebrated with parades, poems, and temples, as if the act itself were holy. The people of Egypt had to smile and clap, because when the rulers were gods, who could dare to criticize divine love? But here's where the story gets nutty. These weren't fairy tale romances. Most of these sibling marriages were built on power struggles and betrayal. Royal family dinners were practically political war zones. Take Ptolemy IV, for example. He married his sister Arsinoe III, but also had her murdered when she became too popular with the people. Later, Ptolemy VIII, nicknamed Physcon, meaning the bloated one, married his sister, then later married her daughter, his own niece, and had his sister wife executed. That's not love, that's dynasty-level dysfunction. These weren't isolated cases. This was the system. Every sibling pair who took the throne continued the divine tradition, even when it destroyed their families from within. The logic was simple. Outsiders couldn't claim the throne if no outsiders existed. And that's how the Ptolemies created one of the most inbred royal bloodlines in world history. Modern genetic studies even suggest that after generations of intermarriage, some members may have suffered physical deformities or psychological instability. Yet, in the eyes of the court, this madness was proof of purity, not weakness. By the time Cleopatra was born in 69 BCE, sibling marriage wasn't just a custom, it was law. She would follow it too, marrying her two brothers in turn. But Cleopatra was not like the others. She was smarter, sharper, and far more ambitious than her predecessors, and she would use her family's twisted traditions to outsmart them all. If you think modern family feuds get messy, Cleopatra's family tree was practically fertilized with betrayal. The Ptolemies didn't just rule Egypt, they ruled over each other, with daggers hidden behind golden smiles. Let's rewind a century before Cleopatra's birth, to Ptolemy XIII Physcon, the bloated king whose cruelty was legendary. Physcon was so jealous of his brother Ptolemy VI and sister wife Cleopatra II that he not only married Cleopatra II himself after his brother's death, but also married her daughter Cleopatra III at the same time. Imagine that, a man married to both mother and daughter, and both women were his nieces. It's like an ancient Egyptian soap opera written by a madman. But the family drama didn't stop there. When Cleopatra II rebelled against him, Physcon murdered her son, his own nephew, cut the body into pieces, and sent it to her in a box as a gift. This was what royal power looked like in the Ptolemaic household, twisted, theatrical, and drenched in blood. By the time Cleopatra VII, the famous one, came into the world, this toxic environment was the norm. Power wasn't inherited, it was seized, often from your own kin. Her father, Ptolemy XIII, was known as the flute player because he loved his music more than his duties. But his reign was chaotic, and by the time he died, the throne was hanging by a thread. He left the kingdom jointly to his teenage children, Cleopatra VII, and her younger brother, Ptolemy III, who also became her husband. Yes, you heard that right. Cleopatra married her own little brother. He was about 10 years old at the time, but Cleopatra was not about to play the submissive queen. From the start, she ruled independently, placing her name alone on official documents and coins. Her brother's advisors, greedy, power-hungry men, didn't like that, so they pushed the boy king to turn on his sister wife. By the time Cleopatra was 21, she'd been exiled from her own kingdom. Her face was scratched off temple walls, her name erased from papyrus scrolls. The royal family that had once married itself to preserve power was now devouring its last great heir. But Cleopatra was not done. She was about to pull off one of the boldest political comebacks in ancient history, one that would make her name immortal. And her secret weapon, a Roman general named Julius Caesar, and the most seductive political alliance in history. By 48 BCE, Cleopatra was exiled, humiliated, and desperate. Her brother-husband Ptolemy XIII had control of Egypt's throne, and his advisors were hunting her down. But if the Ptolemaic dynasty had taught Cleopatra anything, it was this: survival depends on who you control, not who you love. That's when Rome came to Egypt's doorstep. Julius Caesar, fresh from civil war, had landed in Alexandria, supposedly to settle a dispute between the royal siblings. Cleopatra saw her opening, but how could she even reach Caesar when her brother's army controlled the palace? Simple, she snuck herself in. According to ancient accounts, Cleopatra had herself wrapped in a carpet, some say a linen sack, smuggled through enemy lines, and unrolled at Caesar's feet, like a gift from the gods. Imagine that moment. the most powerful man in the world staring down at the young exiled queen who'd just risked her life for an audience. Cleopatra didn't beg. She charmed. She reasoned. She spoke 7 languages. She knew how to make herself unforgettable. By morning, she had done the impossible, turned her exile into an alliance. Caesar backed her claim to the throne, forcing Ptolemy XIII's army into retreat. But when the young king's forces clashed with Caesar's troops at the Nile, tragedy struck. Ptolemy drowned while fleeing, swallowed by the very river that had sustained his ancestors for millennia. Cleopatra was queen again, restored to power by the might of Rome. But the story didn't end with Caesar's victory, because Cleopatra had something Caesar wanted, too: Egypt's wealth. In the years that followed, their alliance deepened into a romance that scandalized Rome. Cleopatra bore Caesar's son, Caesarion, and for a time, the Queen of Egypt and the ruler of the Roman Republic ruled side by side, but this relationship was more than love, it was strategy. Cleopatra knew Caesar's power could protect her fragile throne. In return, she dazzled him with Egypt's riches, intellect, and charm. She even staged elaborate spectacles, floating down the Nile on golden barges, dressed as the goddess Isis, surrounded by incense, music, and priests. To the Egyptian people, Cleopatra wasn't just a ruler. She was divine, but Rome's senators didn't share the awe. To them, Caesar's Egyptian queen was a foreign witch, a manipulator, a threat. When Caesar was assassinated in 44 BCE, Cleopatra's world once again turned upside down. She had lost her protector, and enemies were closing in. But if the Ptolemies were anything, they were survivors. And Cleopatra was about to repeat history by taking another Roman lover, this time one even more dangerous than Caesar. After Julius Caesar's assassination, the Roman Republic collapsed into chaos. 3 men divided the power: Octavian, Caesar's adopted son, Lepidus, and the legendary general Mark Antony. Antony, charismatic, battle-hardened and adored by his soldiers, was sent east to secure Rome's territories. But as his ships sailed toward Egypt, he wasn't just entering a foreign land. He was sailing into Cleopatra's trap of charm and power. When he arrived in Tarsus, Cleopatra knew she couldn't simply meet a Roman general, she had to conquer him. So she made an entrance that even Hollywood couldn't exaggerate. Ancient chroniclers say Cleopatra sailed up the Cydnus River in a golden barge with purple sails, oars of silver, and attendants dressed as nymphs and cupids. She reclined beneath a canopy of gold, dressed as the goddess Isis, surrounded by clouds of incense and exotic music. Mark Antony was spellbound. Their first meeting was electric, part politics, part seduction, and part myth-making. Cleopatra didn't just talk of alliances. She spoke of destiny. Egypt could restore Antony's glory, she told him. Together, they could rule the world, and Antony believed her. He followed her back to Alexandria, abandoning Roman politics for Egyptian splendor. There, the two ruled like deities, hosting lavish feasts that made the empire whisper. Cleopatra was Isis incarnate, Antony the embodiment of Dionysus. They drank, gambled, and lived as if Rome's judgment didn't exist. But behind the gold and wine, both had strategic motives. Cleopatra needed a Roman protector. Antony needed Egyptian wealth to fund his wars. It was a love story built on mutual ambition. Still, passion often blinds even the most powerful. As their relationship deepened, Antony's decisions grew reckless. He divorced his Roman wife, who happened to be Octavian's sister, igniting a feud that would change history. Octavian began spreading propaganda that Cleopatra had bewitched Antony, turned him against Rome, and planned to make her son, Caesarion, the new ruler of the empire. The wicked queen of the East became Rome's ultimate villain, but Cleopatra and Antony were defiant. They married in an Egyptian ceremony, distributed territories to their children, and openly declared their joint rule. To Rome, it looked like treason. The stage was set for one of history's greatest showdowns: Rome versus Egypt, Octavian versus Antony and Cleopatra. It all came to a head in 31 BCE at the Battle of Actium. Cleopatra commanded her fleet alongside Antony, but when her ships turned and fled mid-battle, whether out of panic or strategy, Antony followed her. Their forces collapsed. Back in Alexandria, surrounded and defeated, Antony fell on his own sword. When Cleopatra found him dying, she tried to save him, but it was too late. Octavian entered Egypt soon after. Cleopatra knew what awaited her: humiliation in Rome's triumph parade. She refused to be a trophy. Instead, she chose her own end, and her death became legend. A venomous asp, a golden chamber, and the final act of the Ptolemaic dynasty. But before we reach that infamous ending, let's uncover the darker legacy Cleopatra left behind, and how her family's obsession with blood purity led to its own extinction. By the time Cleopatra VII ruled Egypt, her family's legacy was already dripping with betrayal. The Ptolemaic dynasty, founded by Ptolemy I, one of Alexander the Great's generals, had survived nearly 300 years, not through love, but through ruthless self-preservation. The royal motto might as well have been, "Better a sibling dead by your hand than a rival alive at your table." Generations of Ptolemies had practiced brother-sister marriage to keep their bloodline pure. But what they preserved in blood, they destroyed in sanity. By Cleopatra's time, the line was genetically fragile, riddled with paranoia, deformities, and possibly mental instability. Scholars even believe that the dynasty's obsession with purity led to physical and psychological decline, and Cleopatra's family proved that curse true. Her father, Ptolemy XIII, was a weak ruler, despised by his people. To hold power, he bribed Rome heavily, draining Egypt's wealth. When he died, he left behind chaos: 2 daughters and 2 sons, all claiming the throne. Cleopatra's older sister Berenice IV seized power while their father was in exile. When he returned with Roman support, he executed her, his own child. Years later, Cleopatra would repeat the same pattern, executing her younger siblings to keep her throne. It was a dynasty cannibalizing itself. Even in death, the Ptolemies seemed cursed by their own politics. Cleopatra and Antony's children were divided up like spoils of war by Octavian, the future Emperor Augustus. Caesarion, her son with Julius Caesar, was executed on Octavian's orders. Her twins with Antony, Alexander Helios, and Cleopatra Selene were paraded as trophies through Rome's streets. Selene, the only one who survived into adulthood, lived quietly as the Queen of Mauritania, far from the grandeur and madness of her ancestors. Cleopatra's death in 30 BCE marked the end of not just her rule, but her entire bloodline. Egypt became a Roman province. The dynasty that once built temples, libraries, and legends was gone, consumed by its own hunger for control. But Cleopatra's image never died. Octavian tried to destroy her reputation, portraying her as the wicked Eastern temptress who seduced and corrupted Roman heroes. Yet over the centuries, Cleopatra transformed into something else entirely, a symbol of power, intelligence, and defiance. Even today, she stands as one of history's most misunderstood figures, a woman trapped between love and politics, empire and identity, ambition and destiny. Her story reminds us that history's greatest empires often crumble, not from outside invasion, but from within, from betrayal, obsession, and the unrelenting thirst for power. And maybe that's the real curse of the Ptolemies, not just their bloodline, but the belief that power can ever be truly pure. So what can we learn from Cleopatra's incestuous dynasty and its self-inflicted downfall? History shows that obsession with purity, whether blood, power, or ideology, always leads to collapse. The Ptolemies built walls of gold and marble, but inside, they rotted from fear and jealousy. Cleopatra herself was brilliant, charismatic, and daring. But even she couldn't escape the tangled web her ancestors wove. In the end, her empire fell, her bloodline ended, and her story became legend. But she still won in a way, because over 2,000 years later, we're still telling her tale, the queen who outsmarted generals, seduced emperors, and defied an empire lives on, not as a villain, not as a victim, but as history's eternal mystery. So next time you hear Cleopatra's name, remember, behind the glamour was madness, behind the love was strategy, and behind the dynasty was a curse carved in stone and sealed with blood. If you enjoyed this dive into Cleopatra's dark dynasty, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. because on Nutty Time Tales, we uncover the weirdest, creepiest, and most fascinating stories history tried to bury. Until next time, stay curious, stay nutty, and remember, history is stranger than fiction.